Hi, everyone. Today's mini lesson is over the integumentary system. Now, the integumentary system is going to include your hair, your skin, and your nails. This lesson is going to focus on your skin only. So let's dive into your body's largest organ and see all the things that it does for you. When we're looking at the skin, it's important that we talk about the main functions. The first and probably the most obvious is protection. The skin is protecting all of the deeper layers, so our muscles, our organs, all being protected by the skin. We'll talk also about some of the cells that are present and the immune function that the skin does have. It also acts as a water barrier to keep water in and to keep substances out. Metabolic regulation is another function that it carries, pigment production, secretion and absorption, that immune defense, which also goes within protection, temperature regulation, and sensory reception. And we'll talk about each of these and the layers in which each of these functions is found. The skin is made up of four main types of tissues. We'll find epithelial tissues, nervous tissues, muscle tissues, and connective tissues, all of them having properties within inside our skin itself. So let's talk about the three main layers of the skin. And we will go through this little mini lecture in that order. We're going to start at the most superficial layer, which is going to be the epidermis, followed by the layer below, which is dermis, and below that, the hypodermis. Now, I do want to take a note of these words of epi, which is always going to mean on top of, and hypo, which is going to mean below. So we'll see these words used again. Now, the skin has three main layers. Most superficially, we have the epidermis, hence the term epi inside of the word. Below that is going to be the dermal layer or the dermis, and this is going to be the thickest, most middle layer of the skin. And below that is going to be the hypodermis, sometimes called the subcutaneous layer. So we're going to go in the order of most superficial and work our way deep. So in that, the first layer that we're going to start with is going to be the epidermis. Let's start with the epidermis, the most superficial layer of our skin. Let's look close up at that epidermal layer. Starting at the most superficial region, we have the stratum corneum. And the stratum corneum up here is going to be our outermost layer of dead keratinized cells. This is going to be important for us because it's going to give us a tough outer surface and also give us some waterproofing. Right below that is going to be the stratum lucidum. Now, this layer is important to note because this is only found inside the thick skin areas of our body. So places like the soles of the foot and the palms of the hand. Now, both of these areas are going to be subject to more abrasion and more force. And so this extra layer is going to give us extra protection. So stratum lucidum. Below that is the stratum granulosum. And this is going to be where cells are going to start to harden and fill with keratin. And this keratin is what's going to initiate all of that waterproofing. The layer below that is the stratum spinosum. And this is going to have keratinocytes. And these keratinocytes are present because they're going to be what produces the keratin that we see in these next layers that give us that waterproof protective properties. In the stratum spinosum, we also are going to see desmosomes. And desmosomes are going to be interconnection pieces between the individual cells. The layer below that's the bottom layer of the epidermis, and this is going to be the stratum basale, also called the basement layer of the skin sometimes. But this stratum basale is going to be important because this is where the cells are alive. And this is also where we end up with stem cells. So stem cells are going to be our root cell. And we find these all over our body, but stem cells are the beginning cell in that they haven't quite differentiated and turned into cells that have a specific property or role or job. And so these stem cells are new down here. And this is also going to be where we have DNA still present inside of our nucleus. So you'll notice inside of these cells here, we have our nucleus, and that is located inside of these stem cells, cells that we have yet to differentiate and turn into the cells that they're supposed to be. And so these are very beginning cells. And the DNA that is inside of this nucleus is fragile. And so we have melanocytes, that's these dark green cells here. They're going to have these arm-like projections that are going to help protect the cells and protect them from UV rays that are going to be coming in from the outside of the skin. And so those melanocytes are going to really have an important role in protection against that. Now, also what's happening here is that UV rays are going to help us in the production of a precursor of vitamin D. This is why we say when you need um, vitamin D, go out inside of the sun, and that's because UV rays are going to stimulate the production of that precursor of vitamin D. Well, why do we care? And that is because vitamin D is required for the absorption of calcium. Calcium is important for the maintenance of health of our bones, nervous tissue, and also muscle contraction. So calcium plays a very vital role, and we need vitamin D to do that. And inside of the skin is one of those places where we can make a precursor of vitamin D with the help of UV rays. But UV rays, as we know, can also damage our skin and give us things like cancer. And if these melanocytes can't protect the cell enough, that's what eventually ends up happening. So that is all the layers of the epidermis from superficial to deep. Remember, the deepest layer is our stratum basale, which is where those stem cells are located. As they push up towards the most superficial region of this, the stratum corneum, these are dead skin cells that are going to slough off. Now, it's important that when we talk about the epithelial layer or the epidermis, is that there is keratinized and non-keratinized. Keratinized is where the keratin is filled inside of those dead cells. And that's what's going to give us that waterproof, protective, tough layer. Some of the top layer of skin does not have keratin, which means that it's non-keratinized. This is going to be found in places like our mouth, our eyes. Look at our mouth, for instance. So go ahead and you can look at your lip or you can touch it. But if you touch the outside of your mouth, and then if you pull down your bottom lip and feel on the inside, you notice that skin is slippery and different feeling. And that is the difference between keratinized and non-keratinized. Now let's go into the dermal layer. So we've done the epidermis and talked about those layers. Now let's talk about the dermis. And the dermal layer is important because there are a lot of different functions. And you see a lot of pieces that sit inside this middle, thicker layer. And we will talk about some of those pieces. So let's talk about why it's important. First, it supports the epidermis above. It's going to help provide nutrients and oxygen to the skin. It's also going to have our different collagen fibers and elastic fibers that are going to give skin its ability to stretch and recoil or rebound. These fibers are what end up lacking as we age. It's when skin loses its elasticity, which we often see with sagging or creeping skin. The other things that we have inside of the dermis is going to be the structures that are going to give us sensation for temperature regulation and other sensations. Now let's look back here. We have here a Pacinian corpuscle, and Pacinian is going to help us with the sensation of pressure. We also have different sensory receptors for pain, deep touch, light touch, vibration. So different receptors for each one of those senses. And these sensory receptors are picking up information and sending it back to our brain for our brain to decide what we need to do. Now, we also can see here things like sweat glands. Sweat glands are going to be important because it's going to, one, release sweat, but inside of that sweat, there are several different things. One is that there's going to be immune function here. Immune function in the form of cells that are going to create sort of the acidic environment and also have different properties to help as our first line of defense in our immune system, but also it's going to help with secretion of nitrogenous waste that build up inside of our body. So we use it as a way to get rid of those wastes. Some other things that you see here is a hair follicle located inside of the dermis. And we also see the shaft of the hair coming up and out of the skin. We also see a sebaceous gland, which is going to help with oil production, which is helping lubricate the shaft of the hair, which also has its own immune properties and also helping with the overall health of the hair. We can see here an erector pili muscle, which is going to help with the movement of the hair follicles. We also see the importance of that with inside of our maintenance of homeostasis in that trying to keep us warm or cool. Same with sweat, helping maintain homeostasis by giving us evaporative effects. We also notice inside this layer vascularization, and this vascularization, both the arteries and veins, are going to do one of two things: either bring nutrients like oxygen to the area or collect different wastes that build up inside of the area and bring it back for filtration. We also could see nerve endings inside of this area, and this will pick up sensations of pain and send it back to the brain. So here's some different examples of sensory receptors, and a lot of these are inside the skin, and we talked about them. So temperature receptors, touch receptors. Touch can include pressure, vibration, texture, also pain receptors are going to be there. We have chemoreceptors and baroreceptors that pick up changes. Now, not all of these are found inside the skin, but these are just examples of some of the other types of sensory receptors we have around our body. Now, inside the dermis, we can divide this up into two different layers. We could talk about the most superficial layer, which sits right behind or right below the basement membrane or the stratum basale, is the papillary layer. So this is the uppermost layer of the dermis, and below that is the reticular layer. Now, the papillary layer is going to be made mostly of loose connective tissue. There's going to be dermal papillae, which are small little bumps that we see. And these small little bumps are going to interlock with the epidermis, and it's going to help increase the overall surface area. Now, this idea of increasing surface area, I'm going to talk briefly about this because we're going to see it over and over with inside the human body. If we picture a long ribbon, let's picture it as 6 feet long. That ribbon, 6 feet long, is from end to end stretched out 6 feet. Now, we could fit that into a 1 foot piece by scrunching that ribbon up. It doesn't change the amount of fibers in this ribbon or the different properties the ribbon may have, but it's going to curl it up and create folds, but has the same amount of surface area. So we see this inside of our body where we increase surface area by having these folds. And so we see this inside the papillary layer. In the papillary layer, we will have the capillaries, some of those pain receptors, and some of those touch receptors. Right below that is going to be the reticular layer. The reticular layer is going to be the deeper layer of the dermis, and it's made up of dense, irregular connective tissue. And this is where we'll see our collagen fibers and our elastin fibers, both of them giving the skin its structure and support and elasticity. Again, these are the fibers that we see less and less of as we age. Now, we also will see blood vessels and hair follicles within this region, sweat glands, sebaceous oil glands, and free nerve endings. So everything that we saw basically inside of this picture, sweat glands, sebaceous oil glands, and free nerve endings. So everything that we saw basically inside of this picture. All right, that's the two layers of the dermis, papillary and reticular layer. Now let's move into the hypodermis. So we've talked about the epidermis, the uppermost layer that's 4 to 5 layers thick, including stem cells, and that very top layer that sloughs off. We talked about the dermis and all the structures inside there that are made for sensation, immune responses, things like that. And then we have the hypodermis. Now, the hypodermis is sometimes called the subcutaneous layer. This is going to be the innermost layer beneath the dermis, and it's made mostly of connective tissue and fat. So the important feature of this is that there's fat storage here. We often think of fat as having a negative connotation, but fat actually are an energy reserve for us. Talk about the 3 macromolecules or macronutrients that we utilize for metabolism, and they are carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And fats do play a vital role at energy production. So having fat around does give us energy for later and acts as a storage for that energy. But fat also acts as an insulator in that it keeps us warm. Now, it cushions muscles and bones and is going to help protect us from overall impact. So we'll see fat in other places of our body around particular organs that need to have some sort of shock absorption to keep them safe. Now, retaining heat and keeping us warm is going to be a good role for homeostasis of the hypodermal layer and that fat. But also within the hypodermis, we do have vasculature that's going to supply all the nutrients and help regulate that body temperature by either vasodilating or vasoconstricting. Vasodilating meaning that those blood vessels are dilating or getting larger, or vasoconstricting where we are closing off and getting smaller vasculature. All right, so here is again the overall roles of the skin. We have the epidermal layer, which is going to be protection, water barrier, metabolic regulation, pigment production, secretion absorption, and immune defenses. Now, we didn't quite get into all the immune defenses, but there's going to be dendritic cells, macrophages, Langerhans cells, all of them that are going to be able to detect and destroy pathogens. Inside the dermis, we talked about temperature regulation, sensory reception. Hypodermis is not on the screen, but we do know that temperature regulation is also going to be a role of that. So as you can see, the skin itself has a lot of vital roles for us for homeostasis, immune response, and overall protection. I hope that this little mini lesson helped you understand the integumentary system a little more. Happy studying.